Justice Sotomayor.
Why would even a person with arthritis, why would Congress think they needed to shoot 400 to 700 or 800 rounds of ammunition under any circumstance?
You can't shoot.
If you don't let a person without arthritis do that, why would you permit a person with arthritis to do it?
Well, they don't shoot 400 or 700 rounds because the magazine only goes up to 50. So you're still going to have to change the magazine after every round. We allow large capacity magazines up to 50. And also, there are many shooters who can pull the trigger of a semi-automatic rifle very quickly, who can accomplish rates of fire similar to those that approach fully automatic weapons. So I don't...
Right. Counsel, you spoke about legislative history, and I think you're trying to bat away all of the statements during the legislative process that called functions of the trigger the single pull of the trigger by the shooter.
That's right.
But it's not classic legislative history. It's how people understood a term at the time. That's not legislative history.
Well, it's still legislative history. They're just using it for a purpose that they claim.
Well, Justice Thomas said in McDonald versus City of Chicago that it's perfectly acceptable to do that, to use, he said, if it's being cited to show what lawmakers, how lawmakers used a particular term that's different than what they intended.
So if we're using legislative history in an effort to discern the original public meaning of the statute, which is how I understand Your Honor's characterization, and I think that's how Mr. Fletcher is trying to characterize his reliance on this statement from Mr. Frederick, which
It's
is,
not just
which
that.
is the statement of a lobbyist.
We've got statements in the House. We've got from legislators in the House. We have statements from legislators in the Senate. All of them consistently translating function of the trigger to mean a single pull of the trigger.
Right, and they're all wrong because the statute also was written to encompass weapons that have push triggers rather than pull triggers. And the Solicitor General acknowledges this point in her opening brief. So
what it suggests to me is that, contrary to what you're saying, that is they never understood this to be how the trigger functions, but how the shooter functions.
No, I think we should draw the exact opposite inference. It proves how unreliable legislative history is as a tool to try to discern what a statute means. Because, well, it's because, Justice Sotomayor, the phrase pull of the trigger can't be equated with function of the trigger, and even the Solicitor General acknowledges that because they say in their brief that the statute needs to be read in a way that encompasses fully automatic weapons that have push triggers rather than triggers that are pulled.
And you
so
agree.
the word function, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And you agree.
I agree that function can't be equated with the word pull.
But the only way you can get there is by looking at what the shooter is doing.
No, that's not correct.
Counsel,
you don't need to look at what the shooter's doing. A weapon can go off by accident. You don't need a shooter. There's still a function of the trigger. If the weapon falls onto the floor and goes off accidentally with a discharge, the trigger has functioned, even though the shooter hasn't pulled the trigger or pushed it or bumped it. What matters under this statute is what the trigger does. And all these examples that we see in the Solicitor General's brief, Justice Gorsuch mentioned this earlier, when they're taking transitive verbs, when they say swing of the bat, or stroke of the key, or roll of the dice. All of those are transitive verbs that are capable of taking an object. So when you see swing of the bat, there's obviously an unnamed actor in that sentence that is the subject of the verb swing. The bat can't swing itself. The bat's an inanimate object. Function of the trigger is entirely different. Function is an intransitive verb. It can't take an object grammatically. It's impossible. Trigger has to be the subject of function. It can't be the object. I'm sorry.
Justice